Okay, this is the Sublime, Self-Reference, and Wordsworth Resolution and Independence in, what is this? This is Comparative Literature. Okay. By MLN Comparative Literature. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, MLN Comparative Literature. I don't know if they're two different things, but interesting. Okay. So, here we go. Let's drop the music and we're off. As a number of scholars have persuaded us, it is hard and a little dangerous to generalize about the sublime. That's fair. People have been arguing about that, especially since Kant. Kant made a big deal about sublime. Hard because the sublime is at once a diverse collection of aesthetic theories, a genre of literary performances, and a thematic paradigm that recurs with a compulsive and often comic regularity in post-Enlightenment writings of the highest and lowest forms. Yeah, I mean, this is Kant and Enlightenment does stuff. Dangerous because the attempt to generalize can involve the same combination of imaginative striving and failure, with the same effect of pathos verging on bathos. Wow, I haven't seen bathos in a while, because pathos is like, from pathology, but bathos is I forget what that is. I liked Sublime back in the day. They were great. Bathos is a different kind of feeling, not the same feeling, but what's bathos? I'm blanking. I'm gonna go look it up real fast. I mean, what's it? Lana Del Rey just did a. That's. Why is that popping up? Okay. Oh, juxtaposition of the exalted and the commonplace, an unintended juxtaposition of the exalted and commonplace. So, producing a ludicrous effect, anticlimax. All right. I was lucky. That almost doxed me, stupid thing, because it had a. I don't want. No, I just want. Brave. Thank you, Brave, for trying to give away my location on it. Bathhouses are a euphemistic kind. That's funny. Okay. Yeah, Lana Del Rey just covered Doing Time, and it did really well on the chart, so people still like the Sublime. Ludicrous effect? Yeah. I like Ludacris as a rapper, too. Hip-hop is good. Okay, where was it? Dangerous because the attempt to generalize can involve the same combination of imaginative striving and failure, with the same effect of bathos verging on pathos that characterizes some versions of the sublime itself. Conscious of both the difficulty and the danger, I will refrain from generalizing and simply stipulate. The sublime I have in mind is the one that depends on mistaking things, and thus on a lack of fit between the mind and its objects. For example, when one gives an object too much or the wrong kind of importance, one might call it the sublime of disproportion or inaptitude or discrepancy. What makes it sublime instead of just grotesque or sentimental is the way in which the particular discrepancy in question gets interpreted as a revelation of some higher or deeper power, ordinarily the power that was responsible for the initial mistake. This version of the sublime, and again I refrain in the present context from asserting that this is the only version that matters, translates a perception of difference into an act of self-reference. The mind reads an emblem of its own transcendence in the magnitude of a discrepancy between some ordinary phenomenon and the importance the mind has given it, just as in Wordsworth's apostrophe to the philosopher's child in the Intimations Ode. The precise measure of the soul's immensity is the degree to which its exterior semblance can be taken to belie it. We just got a lot of words I don't normally say all at once. That was kind of impressive. I was like, ooh, lots of words. Okay, so I guess we're getting this discrepancy theory here. And the idea is the discrepancy is sublime when we recognize it as having a greater importance than other discrepancies. This is the version of the sublime implicit, for example, in Kant's account. Okay, so this is what I was thinking, yeah, Immanuel Kant. In the critique of judgment of what he calls the dynamical sublime, where sublimity derives from the delightful terror we feel when we imagine ourselves threatened by some natural danger, provided, of course, that we are not really threatened, but are in fact secure. This artificial terror is aroused when we imagine what it would be like to resist the power of some fearful object in nature, perhaps an overhanging rock or a violent storm or a volcano, and then recognize the puniness of our own natural abilities. In itself, such terror merely signals our inability to compete with nature on nature's own terms. If we were really in danger, the thought of resisting nature's power would degenerate into simple fear. But the absence of real danger gives our faculty of reason a chance to intervene. In the same moment that we recognize the futility of resisting nature in any natural way, the sheer fact of our desire to resist it gets interpreted as a sign of the sense in which we can overcome nature, namely in our fidelity to moral principles. This conversion of our imaginary danger into moral self-recognition is what makes our encounter with impressive natural objects a source of the sublime. Nature itself is called sublime, according to Kant, only because it elevates the imagination to a representation of those cases in which the mind can make itself sensible of the proper sublimity of its own vocation, which is even above nature. Alright, so the idea, I guess, is, I haven't thought about Kantian sublime in a while, but it's like basically the fact that we can think about the things that are more powerful than ourselves in nature and then, recognize that we can do this, that reflexive thing, gives us a moral standing in the face of things that are bigger than us. The dynamical sublime thus depends on two representational moves. First, we pretend to resist an imaginary threat. Second, we interpret this pretended resistance as a sign of an utterly different kind of power. Sourstash, welcome in. I hope you're doing well. We're reading some philosophy here. Well, this is actually comparative literature, but philosophy and philosophy-related topics. And, yeah, so we're just talking about the sublime at the moment. My English is very good. Yes. Well, I speak English and bad English. It's in the semiotics, so I'm very happy that you recognize that sometimes. Infernal, what's up? Hope you're having a good day today. Yeah, reading something about the sublime. Sourstay says, but bigger than us? Don't animals think that too, like zebras thinking that with lions? Well, I think the point here is that the recognition of the sublime... You got raided yesterday or the day before, you forgot who did the raid? I don't think it was me. I wasn't on yesterday or day, but that's cool. So that's great. Raids are fun. Yeah, I think the idea is that it's not that the idea that animals don't think that too. I'm sure they do. The question, I guess, that the sublime raises our stash. Oh, the chess and meditation guy. Yeah, that's Evolve Yourself TV. Yeah, it's our friend Evolve Yourself. Yeah, I'm doing all right today, Anne. But Sour Stash, the idea is that the animals don't have a reflexive thing that says, hey, wait, I'm not actually in any danger. Like the zebra doesn't think of the lion and think I'm not actually in danger of the lion. If the zebra sees the lion, they're just afraid. But if we think about a lion, we can feel afraid but not actually be afraid because we are just imagining it. And that gives us a standing, a reflexive understanding. So that's the idea here in the Sublime, is that, yeah, what's going on is that there's a reflection that we can do, and that gives us a moral standing. And that's what Kant was claiming. And anyway, check out our friend Anne. She's streaming. She's had way too many exciting things happen in the last few months, and yeah, it's the old Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. Anne's had way too many interesting times recently, but she's a great streamer and a lot of fun, so go hang out over there if you don't mind. Yeah. So that's how it goes. So yeah, yeah, and Evolve Yourself, by the way, that's also our friend that Sour Stash was. Let's see if I can remember how to spell Evolve Yourself TV and see if this is right. Hey, there we go. That's our buddy Evolve Yourself. Yeah, so yeah, Agni's cool. Sorry. So we haven't gotten anywhere yet. This is, so far, the person has basically just been you know, going over some like classic theory. That's what this Kantian stuff is. And to more fully answer your question, this weekend has basically sucked. I got paper reject. I got 2 papers rejected. One for stupid reasons, one for probably stupid reasons, but I don't even know. They didn't say anything. So I sent them both back out, but like it's just annoying. You send stuff out, you hope. I write philosophy papers, Sour Stash. So one was philosophical logic, and the other, no, they're both on philosophical logic. Yeah. So, yeah, one was on, what were they? One was on paradox, and the other was just on like regular contradictions. So yeah, this is I do some philosophical logic. But yeah. Well, I could one was a desk reject. Oh, hey Valpo, what's up? But yeah, one was a desk rejection, and it was a response paper basically. And this journal I sent it to doesn't really publish response papers, but it was like response paper plus. It had more content than just a response paper. But they didn't say it was just a response paper, because that would have been wrong. They said it was too short, because this place doesn't usually publish short papers. But it's a little unfair. The paper I was responding to was pretty short to begin with. So it's like, yeah, my paper was even shorter, but like I had good content. And so I think they just didn't really understand it, or didn't put the effort in. And so they just said, oh, it's too short. And then it's like they were being lazy. You know, I don't mind. I only wasted a few days there. The amount of time it took for them to, you know, reject it was not... I'm not really complaining about that, although I just think it's stupid. Yeah. And the other one was I got rejected from the Southwest philosophy conference. I was like, oh, that's sad. I kind of wanted to go to the conference, but what are you going to do? And they don't give feedback on their rejections, but that's just a conference. So it's okay. But I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I sent that paper out again, too, but like... I don't know if it's good enough. Yeah, I'll tell you what the problem with journals is, cinesemiotics. It's not the journals itself. Unpublished papers, yeah. There's a journal of universal rejection. Yeah, you want to make the little paradox. Because if it's in the journal, then it shouldn't be in the journal. But like the problem is always the reviewing. If you're gonna have a journal, you need to have people read all the papers, and it's just so hard to review all these things. And so you get people that they just reject it for any reason whatsoever, even if it isn't a good reason. And so that means that a lot of stuff that is good philosophy just gets filtered out very quickly for dumb reasons, because there's too much of a pressure to You've never actually gotten in there? Yeah, it's like, I mean, I can't be angry. Like, I don't think what I sent them was like any great shakes. I was hoping it would be good enough. But yeah, that's all. But like, yeah, I'm not, even if if I'm trying to be objective about what I sent them, I think it was a little too much to bit off more than I could chew in, like, you know, the journal, the space of that article. And so you'd have to have someone reviewing it that really liked the topic, and then they'd probably do it. But that's the problem. I don't know if, like, you know, then you're just at the luck of the draw of who's reviewing it. Like when you read Misconnections, see what other people are thinking. Well, the truth is, cinesemiotics, that's all the journals, is what you're seeing what other people are thinking. Now, if they published all the reviewer reports, then you could see what people were thinking. Like, so if you actually got to see all the reviewer reports, the full reviewer reports, because I think sometimes editors cut them down because the reviewers are saying stupid things, because I've gotten weird reports before, and I think the reviewers are just like idiots and the editor can't do anything about it. But yeah, that's what it would be. If like you could get like a book of like the worst or best reviewer reports, then yeah, that would be better. Otherwise, all of philosophy is just seeing what people are thinking. Yeah. No, it's like this curated journal paper that was so hilariously wrong-headed that becomes an entertainment journal. You know, it'd be more cringe than anything else. Like, you're reading bad philosophy. Bad philosophy is just really bad. Like, you know, it's like I'm sure you've seen, film better than like most of us, and you see like these student works that just like the kid doesn't know what they're doing or something like that. It's like I've read papers. I've only read one paper that just outright made like dumb mistakes in it, and it somehow got past review. And it was only one dumb mistake. There is a place for bad ideas. Sometimes there's Cinesemax. There's plenty. We've read plenty of bad papers in philosophy roulette, and so it's like the bad ones get through too. And it's like just because they're all bad, like sifting through all the rejected ones would be sifting through even more garbage. Like you can assume that peer review does do at least a modicum of like good filtering, but like if you're gonna get all the ones that were thrown out, that would be tough, real tough, because there's gonna be people out there that think they know how to write philosophy. A well-written paper about garbage ideas. Oh, you want a straight-up garbage about ideas? That's a good question. I don't know about well-written papers about garbage ideas themselves, but like there's just plenty of garbage ideas and plenty of badly written papers, and then badly written papers that have garbage ideas. But yeah, it's hard enough to find one good paper as opposed to, and that's with everyone trying to write a good paper. Good luck finding a whole bunch of well-written papers there too, but that would be excellent. There are journals of rhetoric. There aren't as many of them as I'd like, but there are journals of rhetoric. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they were well written, but did they have any good ideas in them? I don't know, because it would just be a lot of rhetoric. Yeah. I actually, this is a thought I had a long time ago to go look up journals of rhetoric and maybe read some on philosophy roulette. I forgot about that. I'm going to write it down. Yeah, like that might actually not be such a terrible thing to go find better written papers, but not that actually say much. Because rhetoric, a lot of times they don't say as much. They say it nicely though. I mean, I do like the philosophy and the literature. Like this is like literary theory, but there is like philosophy and literature, and a lot of times those are better written papers. Now, granted, what their topics are, I don't know if the topics are very good, but there is stuff. Yeah, I don't want to read. I don't think slimy lawyers maybe, but like then you're not actually saying they have like you're reading anything good. Like being slimy doesn't make it well written. It just means they're being slick about it. I think the rhetoric people actually kind of have an idea about how to put a paper together, but I don't know if they have anything like impressive to say. Like they're not. If they had something big to say, then they'd be doing philosophy. The rhetoric people, they just they want to understand what it is to say something well, not to necessarily go and deep dive into like big ideas. And that's not to say that they're not interested in it, it's just their focus is different. Okay. Anywho, if you have any questions, let me know. But yeah, so we've discussed saying things well, and what is this thing we're discussing in terms of Sublime. It's sort of like the reflection of the bigger powers in yourself and your sort of relief in being able to understand bigger powers in yourself without actually having to be crushed by them. Yeah, so we pretend to resist an imaginary threat, so you're not getting crushed by a bigger power. And second, we interpret this pretend resistance as a sign of an utterly different kind of power. Yeah, so it's your moral standing. All right. But how exactly does the first of these moves produce the second? Why should feigning resistance to an absent danger count as the sign of a higher power? The answer would seem to lie, though Kant in no way spells this out, in the curious inappropriateness of the impulse to resist. What the heck does that mean? For the resistance in question, human resistance to the power of nature, is simultaneously pointless and futile. Pointless because the danger isn't real, and futile because if the danger were real, resistance wouldn't work. Yeah, well, that's why things are in your imagination. It is because this energy of resistance has and can have no appropriate object that seems to break free of the scene that occasions it, and thus to mimic the unconditioned freedom of our moral agency. Yeah, and of course you can. Seen in this way, the sublime reduces an arbitrary equation of futility and freedom, of pointless exertion and moral autonomy, an equation based only on the impossibility in both cases of grounding our mental energy in any appropriate natural object. Yeah, but I mean, that's the whole point of imagination, is that it doesn't necessarily need to be possible or real. Like, you can imagine lots of stuff, and it doesn't always doesn't have to be possible to exist. Like, you can imagine a very, very, very big metal ball, a ball so big and massive that it would actually collapse into itself and, start a nuclear reaction because it's so heavy, but because of the physics. But you can imagine this thing, and it's impossible. Now, the question here is, it's impossible for you to actually imagine this, because if you were imagining yourself in danger, then you would be in danger. You would actually get afraid. But the point is that because you're imagining it, you shouldn't actually be afraid. So the question is, what the heck is going on? Yeah, I was going to be able to read fictional novels and having an imagination. Yes, our stash. And it says, how do you say in English when you want to say that X has a single line of thinking, or one way of thinking without opening up to ideas, in pretty formal technical English? I mean, there's different ways of saying it. I don't know if it's technical. I mean, you can say people are single-minded. Suspension of disbeliefs. That's what we're talking about in the paper. They're single-minded. You could also say you can also say blinders. That's good. Synesthesiotics. Monomaniacal is good, because that means they're maniacal about one thing. I mean, there's target fixation, which comes out of the military, where you're just you don't realize you're looking so carefully at your target that you ignore everything else, and a lot of times you run into things because you're so focused on your target. So there's target fixation, but that's a military term. I think the monomaniacal is a good way of saying it. Rigidity of thought. Those are good. I mean, yeah. Okay, good. I mean, if you have anything else, fixated is the best. Okay, I mean, it depends what your usage is, but as long as happy to help. Thank you, Synesthesiotics. Okay, so virtually the same equation of pointlessness and autonomy show up in Wordsworth, who makes the equation seem even more abstract and arbitrary than it seems in Kant. That's impressive. You can make something more abstract and arbitrary than Kant. The salient movements in Wordsworth poetry, the movements, that is, that have received the fullest modern commentary, almost invariably depend on the recognition of some disparity between the mind's exertions and the objects in which its energies are invested. Sometimes, as in the by now too famous translation of disappointment into triumph during recollection of crossing Simplon Pass, Wordsworth almost perfectly enacts the Kantian scenario. An experience of failure indirectly reveals the preternatural strength of desire and hope. In more typical instances, Wordsworth goes beyond even the highly artificial pathos of Kant's account to suggest a formal, almost clinical registering of disparities. Here, the significance of the disparity is strangely detached from the supposition of anyone's experiencing it. The sublime is restricted to a wholly abstract or exemplary role. I mean, that's fair. I mean, if it doesn't make sense in Kant, which it might not, putting it even more abstract might be the right thing to do. Wordsworth's doctrine of the spots of time, for example, depends on the detachment of certain images from whatever emotions first made them seem important. A boy reacts superstitiously to his father's death, which he mistakenly interprets as a magical retribution for his own eagerness to go home on a school vacation. Hey Lumpy, what's up, Hope you're doing well, Lumpy. His superstitious excitement fixes in his memory the image of an ordinary landscape associated with his intense desire to go home. Years later, long after the superstition has worn off, he discovers that the image has outlived the emotions that gave it its original salience. It now survives as an abstract emblem of the mind's excessive power, strictly a power to delude itself. And this doctrine of the mind's power, rather than any present experience of such power, is what makes the image a source of consolation in times of imaginative poverty. A passage that precedes this spot of time in the two-part Prelude of 1799 explicitly states this identification of autonomy with detachment from context. I might advert to numerous accidents in flood or field, quarry or moor, or amid the winter's snows, distresses and disasters, tragic facts of rural history that impressed my mind, with images to which in following years far other feelings were attached, with forms that yet existed with independent life and, like their archetypes, know no decay. Okay, so that's interesting. It's like if you have, fixated on an image for years, as we were saying, fixated, and then the reason for the fixation leaves, you're still going to have that image sort of fixed in your mind. And what happens at that point? The temporal character of the spots of time make them especially dependent on autobiographical narrative. A single spot is necessarily the product of at least two separate moments in the career of a single agent. Only in the tranquil perspective of a later moment can the unwarranted excitement of the original experience be recognized as an index of the mind's transcendence through illusion of natural circumstance. But this temporal gap between a moment of powerful error and later a moment of quiet knowledge is not essential to the Wordsworthian sublime. In other cases, the disparity between the two moments in the career of a single agent is replaced by a disparity between two separate agents, the speaker and someone or something else. This is the point, I think, of all those half-natural, half-allegorical figures, aptly called borderers by Jonathan Wordsworth, that rise up or beam down or simply materialize before the poetic speaker at crucial moments in almost all the major poems: the philosopher child, the blind beggar, the discharged soldier, the leech gatherer, and so on. These figures are not quite, in my view, images of the poet's self or answers to his psychic needs, nor do they exactly function, as Neil Hertz has argued in a fine commentary on the Blind Beggar passage in Prelude 7, to stabilize the poet's relation to his text by condensing the threatening multiplicity of language into a manageably unitary form. It is not primarily the unity, but the oddity of these figures, their lack of appropriate relation to the landscape in which they are somehow deposited, that makes them effective, though effective to what end is at this point far from clear. In what follows, I will argue that the point of these figures lies precisely in the way they shrug off or evade or otherwise frustrate whatever narcissistic investment they seem to invite. I will suggest that this frustration of the self's attempt to see itself reflected in such figures is, in a certain sense, repaid through something like the self-referential turn we have witnessed in Kant. But I defer for the moment an attempt to specify just what agency this self-referential turn is supposed to reveal. Okay, so basically what it looks like we're doing here is just juxtaposing ourselves with some other character, but the problem is the character is going to be too contradictory for ourselves. It's going to somehow resist any sort of analysis. And so what we're going to do, hey, Monday and Tuesday off, congratulations. Try to treat yourself nice, take a break, relax, maybe get yourself some good food, and then decide what's going to go on from there. It's good to have a break. This is, basically Lumpy. We're doing some, this is like was a journal of literary criticism that was suggested by Cinesemiotics. But I mean, we're still talking about aesthetics here, so this is talking about the Sublime. So the question is, what kind of self-referential turn is this that's gonna, show something about people? When we start to think about other people and then ourselves, how do we actually understand what's going on there? And they're saying there's something unique to this agency that is given by Wordsworth here. But yeah, you used to write poetry a lot back in high school. Was it any good, or was it just high school poetry? Or, it's like, why not? Our friend Agni over at Evolve Yourself, he likes poetry too. For the record, Cinesemiotics says they contend that the delineation between philosophy and literature is a false delineation. Yeah, I mean, it's mostly going to be sociological, just how people like to call themselves stuff. Ooh, you won a Providence contest. Congratulations. You must have been, not half bad at that point then. So that's good. I never really wrote any poetry. It's probably something I should think about. I've written some short stories. But yeah. I mean, the only real distinction between what counts as philosophy and what doesn't is usually a historical thing, what people want to call philosophy later on. And the reasons why people do it is, is varied actually. So the only real way I think about philosophy is who's willing to ask harder questions. Once you start asking very hard questions, then you get yourself into the realm of philosophy, and then we can discuss what counts as a hard question or not. But like once you start you're asking questions that you're not gonna find easy answers to, then big example. Yeah. But like that's the only way I think about it. It's like what kind of questions are you asking? And yeah, that's about it. And that's the only way because like I said, people do work and then it gets judged to be philosophical later. It's not judged to be philosophical at the time, and then later on it turns into philosophy. You find that you don't have lyrical emotions anymore. I don't think it's bitterness, but simply life experiences. Yeah, that's fair. Like you could write certain kinds of things at a certain time, and then later you don't write them anymore because you're a different person. It doesn't mean you can't do poetry. It's just not going to be the same. And Infernal says, I used to be good at poetry too. Won some contests, then I started taking antidepressants, and my love for poetry faded, but got massively into technical and academic writing in English and Spanish. A whole different monster. Yeah, like you change yourself, and then like you do, it's different. That's fair. I have a buddy who's a writer. He said that he started taking, some drugs for, mental stuff. And he said he would have rather have been crazy if it fucked with his writing. But thankfully, he said it didn't fuck with his writing, so he was like willing to, be less crazy. But like he was very happy that like he didn't really notice a change in his writing. But like yeah. Like it can change who you are or change what you're interested in. So I wouldn't know about. I haven't taken any psych drugs though, so I don't know exactly what that's like. Okay. Author says, my example, chosen a little unfairly in a paper emphasizing the oddity of Wordsworth's borderers, is the figure that more clearly than any other calls attention to itself as an anomalous deposit in an otherwise normal landscape, the figure of the leech gatherer in Resolution and Independence. As we know from the numerous treatments of this poem as a paradigmatic case of the romantic crisis lyric, the leech gatherer appears a third of the way through the poem when he is noticed by the highly self-conscious poetic speaker who has been anxiously meditating in a suitably barren landscape on the bleakness of his own financial prospects. Eventually, the poet engages the leech gatherer in a rather awkward conversation, but only after the stationary figure at last begins to move, an event preceded by the following 4 stanzas of description. Alright, so we're starting at 8. Now, whether it were by peculiar grace, a leading from above, as something given, yet it befell that, in this lonely place, when I with these untoward thoughts had striven, beside a pool bare to the eye of heaven, I saw a man before me unawares, the oldest man he seemed that ever wore grey hairs. As a huge stone is sometimes seen to lie, couched on the bald top of an eminence, wonder to all who do the same espy. Espy, don't know how. I haven't said that word in a while, but what means it could thither come and whence, so that it seems a thing endued with sense, like a sea beast crawled forth, that on a shelf of rock or sand reposeth, there to sun itself. Such seemed this man, not all alive nor dead, nor all asleep in his extreme old age. His body was bent, double feet and head, coming together in life's pilgrimage, as if some dire constraint of pain or rage, of sickness felt by him in times long past, a more than human weight upon his frame had cast. Himself he propped, limbs, body, and pale face, upon a long grey staff of shaven wood, and, still as I drew near with gentle pace, upon the margin of that Moorish flood, motionless as a cloud, the old man stood, that heareth not the loud winds when they call, and moveth altogether, if it move at all. Lumpy says, I think that 20 years in chemistry also deformed my mind to strive for clarity all times, and poetry lives in a sexy word fog. No, you definitely can like change the way you think about the world, and that will change what you want to write. Again, I don't think that means you can't go back to different ways of thinking, but it won't be the way you did it when you were younger. Like, I can't go back to thinking the way I used to. Like, it's just, I don't think it's possible for me to do that. I don't even think it's possible for anyone to, like, really go back. I don't think there is any regression. You think differently in the future, like, as going forward, and you can't go back to old thought. And so in some sense, like, yeah, you may have been in a sexy word fog in the past, but like you can be in a different sexy word fog, but it'll be a different sexy word fog now. Metafloss, really mind, body, problem, proximal, pull up. Yeah, it's like, alert, watch out. It's like, yeah, we're gonna dive into it. Yeah, so again, the question is, what kind of things are you looking at? And when you were, it's one of those things, if all you have is a hammer, then everything you see is a nail. If all you're doing is trying to think about being clear and, like, chemistry stuffs, then that's going to be how you interpret the rest of the world, is through those kind of thinking. But again, there's no reason that you can't start to branch out again. You just got to sort of reinterpret what you're doing. Maybe in a different ways, think about other stuff, and that's up to you if like you want to like try to do that. It's not fun. It's not so easy to do. If all you have a penis, then everything looks like a vagina. I've been told. There's a lot of gay guys out there that would disagree with you. Lumpy Dragon Potato says, good point. I did write a few lyric lines to a friend a few months ago. Yeah, see, that's the thing. It's like it's one of those, you have to find a new way forward. If you're trying to get back to where you were, a lot of times that's just sort of prone to failure. Yeah, yeah. There's other things to be said about what you said, Cinesemiotics. If all you have is a penis, then a lot of things. I don't really want to go into all the thoughts that I just ran through my head. But yeah. Anyhow. These stanzas have received a Moorish flood of commentary, including Wordsworth's own remarks in the 1815 preface, which I will consider in a moment. But first I want to ask just what kind of relation to the perceiver this figure can be said to invite. How and where, for instance, is the old man located in the landscape with which the descriptive similes it might seem to identify him? Cinesemiac says, I'm an LGBTQ person. I totally didn't even think about that. Full point. Good say. Oh. Yeah. And even if you weren't, or if you are, you are not, like, everyone can, like, make different sorts of statements. You're real and you're divorcing another man and I am a man. Okay. Cool. I mean, well, divorce probably is not fun, but, like, it's cool to get married, cool to not get married, I guess. Needed a reason to say penis. Yeah, I mean, the first thought, that, like, one of the thoughts I had is, like, you don't need a vagina to want to stick your dick into stuff. I mean, like, it's just, you don't need that. So, it's like, palimony ain't bad, let me tell you. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, okay. I have no further comment at this time on that. Okay. The protagonist sees a man before him, but at what distance and at what angle? If the old man resembles a huge stone on the top of a distant object, atop of an eminence, and then presumably the speaker is looking up a hill at a distant object. But a sea beast can only crawl forth at sea level, which suggests the old man is at, or more likely below, the speaker's own elevation. The sea beast, moreover, has an obvious origin, namely the sea, and an obvious means of arrival, namely crawling forth. But the stone amazes all its viewers, who wonder by what means it could thither come and whence. This ambiguity about the old man's mode of arrival applies as well to the speaker's mode of discovery. Should we assume that the speaker's perception took the form of an abrupt surprise or of gradual recognition? I saw a man before me unawares. Is unawares an adverb modifying the speaker's action? I saw him unexpectedly, or an adjective indicating the old man's obliviousness of or indifference to the speaker? Yeah, so this is the question. What is it to recognize another person here? In the Jewish tradition, night is when you can't recognize the difference between a dark blue thread and a black thread. These are like, old wives' tales or whatever. You have a sneaking suspicion that there's a sexual reading. I could see that, like, where you're trying to recognize some like untold desire or something. But but like what's it called? And then so that's when night is, when you can't see the difference between a blue thread and a black thread. But morning is when you can first recognize another person's face. And so like you've got this sort of, when can you become aware of certain things, or like where is the awareness of to see another person? So there's probably some sort of, I forget, commentary on this somewhere. Who knows? You see the sea's symbology, the arrival, the directional references. Yeah, that makes some sense. I mean, I haven't read this, so I don't know what's going on in this poem, but it makes some sense. Okay. Wordsworth's own analysis ignores such questions of location and focuses instead on what might be called the old man's ontology. What I have been describing as an ambiguity in the figure's spatial and phenomenological relation to the poetic speaker interests Wordsworth to the poetic speaker's interests Wordsworth here as an ambiguity in the old man's degree of agency, and thus as a symptom of the imagination's capacity to manipulate what Wordsworth calls the indications of life and motion. Yeah, see, this is what I was thinking. What actually counts as a life and motion? Unawares sounds like underwears. Now, this was written in the late 1700s, so I don't know. I mean, did they even call it underwear at the time? I have no idea. I mean, it could be. Okay, in the double simile of stanza 9, according to Wordsworth, the conferring, the abstracting, and the modifying powers of the imagination immediately and mediately acting are all brought into conjunction. The stone is endowed with something of the power of life to approximate it to the sea beast, and the sea beast stripped of some of its vital qualities to assimilate it to the stone, which intermediate image is thus treated for the purpose of bringing the original image, that of the stone, to a nearer resemblance to the figure and condition of the aged man, who is divested of so much of the indications of life and motion as to bring him to the point where the two objects unite and coalesce in just comparison. He's British, so pants, bloomers. Yeah. See, this is the thing. Yeah, we've got some multiple words for these things. And bloomers is such a fun word. I like that, Inferno. The technical point of this analysis seems clear enough. The effect of coalescence results from a series of parallel adjustments in the degrees of agency. But what, if anything, is the thematic point of the imagination's procedure? Is the simile, for instance, a way of reconciling human life and inanimate nature, in which case it offers an emblematic response to the poet's fears, voiced in the preceding stanzas of hyper-conscious isolation and material poverty? Breeches. Underground. Okay, now you're having fun. The trouble with such an account is that the figurative coalescence in this stanza does not seem to reconcile humanity and nature, but instead to isolate the terminal images, old man and stone, from their respective origins in human life and mineral lifelessness. Yeah, that was what I was also wondering. Cinesemiotics, leech gatherer getting sucked. Yeah, it's like there's some blood sucking going on here. The simile, like the leech gatherer himself in stanza 10, is not so much a reconciliation of life and death as an anomalous negation of both conditions, not all alive nor dead, and the simile's effect, a kind of centripetal isolation, is matched by the way the old man is bent double, feet and head, coming together in life's pilgrimage. Okay, so this guy is sort of all wrapped up in like a sphere, kind of like his own little stone of life and like timelessness, yeah. These observations on the peculiarity of the leech gatherer's location and status already indicate the difficulty of establishing his precise relation to the context of the protagonist's self-conscious meditation. Something like a thematic connection seems to emerge, however, when the old man eventually begins to move in the stanza following the description, that's stanza 12. At length himself unsettling, he the pond stirred with his staff, and fixedly did look upon the muddy water, which he conned, as if he had been reading in a book. A figure in this attitude is supposed to be looking at his or her own image, like Milton's Eve, who remembers lying down beside the lake the moment after her creation. To look into the clear, smooth lake, that to me seemed another sky. As I bent down to look, just opposite, a shape within the watery gleam appeared. Bending to look on me, I started back. Wordsworth's variation on this Ovidian motif are of course endless, but two instances seem to me especially close to the leech gatherer's fixing gaze into the pond. When Peter Bell suddenly glimpses a drowned man's corpse beneath the waters of the river Swale, the narrative explodes into a grotesquely comic series of hypothetical explanations of his terror. The narrator mentions, but only in passing, the possibility that Peter has merely seen his own reflection. Is it the moon's distorted face, the ghost-like image of a cloud? Is it a gallows there portrayed? Is Peter of himself afraid? Is it a coffin or a shroud? The list goes on through a series of increasingly gothic possibilities, including in a notorious stanza that Wordsworth removed after appalled reactions to the first published version in 1819, the image of a party in a parlor. Crammed just as they on earth were crammed, some sipping punch, some sipping tea, but as you by their faces see, all silent and damned. I mean, it's funny that this is the sort of thing that would have to, like, a party in a parlor and they're all damned in their part by having fun or whatever. You want to be a gothic possibility? Yeah, like, there's such great imagery in all these things. You don't get, like, this is one of the things that is lacking in philosophy, is like these great images. You're lucky if there's one good metaphor or simile or something like that in a philosophy paper. In like this stuff, like you're getting one after the other here. It's so much more, fun to think about in sort of just like entertaining ways. Philosophy is good because you might have to think of something interesting, but like here you're thinking of things that are just like, you get the blood flowing here. The episode is clearly a violent parody of the self-reflexive gazing. One's own image is merely one in a series of possible occasions for a pointless theatrical terror, an occasion possessing no more or less personal interest than the actual source of Peter's vision, the corpse which Peter will soon extract from the river by winding his staff in its hair. The relevance of this episode of skewed and trivialized narcissism to the figure of the leech gatherer becomes clear when Peter's gaze, like the leech gatherer's, is compared to an act of reading. Never did pulse so quickly throb, and never heart so loudly panted. Here he looks, he cannot choose but look, like someone reading in a book that is enchanted. Yeah, so now we've got throbs and pants again, as you were saying, cinesemiotics. Figurative language is a good tool to transcend the thinking frame imposed by technical vocabulary and prose, but a lot of it is hit and miss. Yeah, I mean, this is why you get one in philosophy. Like, there's usually one good idea and they try to stick to it. But like, when you get a little bit more leeway in literature, you, again, some of it's good and some of it's bad. But that's why in philosophy they have to cut down on it. Yeah, and in Resolution and Independence, Peter's gothic inability to read himself or any particular meaning in the river into which he can't help gazing appears in a strangely attenuated and undramatic form. The lines, once again, at length himself unsettling, he the pond stirred with his staff, and fixedly did look upon the muddy water, which he conned, as if he had been reading in a book. That's the question, Lumpy. Where's the throbbing? The old man unsettles himself in two ways. No, only two ways. Is that what the old man does with his staff? By moving his body and disturbing his image, which is presumably reflected by the motionless surface of the pond before he stirs it. And it is only after he stirs it up, its muddy bottom, that he begins to read the pond, searching, of course, not for any image of the self, but for tiny, wriggling leeches. Increasingly hard to find, as we know from Dorothy's detailed account of her and William's meeting with the actual leech gatherer. If this is narcissism, it is narcissism in an oddly minimal form, reduced to a kind of technical scanning for miniature blips in a virtually opaque medium. This miniaturization of what ought to serve as images of the self is characteristic of the other poem I had in mind as closely related to the leech gatherer, The Thorn, written immediately before the first version of Peter Bell in the spring of 1798. Toward the end of this poem, the narrator either reports or imagines the result of gazing into the pond that lies a few yards distant from the thorn itself. Some say, if to the pond you go, and fix on it a steady view, the shadow of a babe you trace, a baby and a baby's face, and that it looks at you. Whenever you look on it, 'tis plain, the baby looks at you again. This time the joke seems to be the opposite of the grisly one in Peter Bell. What the narrator or his source has seen in the pond is obviously his own reflection and not an actual corpse. Gothic horror reverts to unconscious narcissism. But what are we to make in that case of the curious oscillation between the baby and the baby's face? Has the viewer seen what he thought was a baby's face, but what in fact was his own face, and only imagined the baby's body to go with it? Or is the entire image, a body and face together, required to match the size of an adult countenance? This lack of a satisfactory fit between the self and what is supposed to reflect it extends to the strange little cluster of images. The thorn, the pond, the mossy heap, and the mad woman Martha Ray herself that seem huddled together in an otherwise vast and empty landscape. Introduced by one over the course of the first 6 stanzas, these objects are arranged, or more exactly, deposited, in a space beginning no more than 5 yards, the narrator tells us, from the mountain path from which one espies them. Thorn, pornocracy, 1860, is the dominating influence of harlots, used specifically of the control of the government of Rome and the election to the papacy during the first half of the 10th century by the noble but profligate Theodora and her daughters. Yeah, fun. I wonder what it would be like to actually have a government run by harlots and prostitutes. Yeah, that makes sense. But I mean, I guess it's not too far off from contemporary usage. Yeah, so we've got some people just standing around strangely is what it is. In this so we've got different little vignettes. The closest object, the tree, is not higher than a 2 years child. Probably pretty good. SW folks have been doing mutual aid for a long time. Yeah. Next comes the beauteous heap of a hill of moss, which is like an infant's grave in size, and is just half a foot in height. In lines that were present in the original version but removed after 1815, the narrator tells us that the farthest object, the little muddy pond, the site of the narcissistic gazing already discussed, is 3 feet long and 2 feet wide, and he assures us that he has measured it from side to side. And at least some of them are pro-union, like the strippers who supported the medieval times union. Yes, mutual aid. Okay. Martha herself sits between the heap and the pond, which is located only 3 yards beyond the tree. Adding 3 feet for the length of the pond and another foot or so for the diameter of the tree itself gives a maximum extension of roughly 13 feet for the entire scene. At one point in the poem, the extreme disproportion between the cluster of images and the surrounding landscape is emphasized by a bizarre optical illusion that parallels the spatial ambiguities involving the leech gatherer. The narrator recalls being caught in a fierce storm and seeking shelter beneath what he thought was a jutting crag. Yes, jutting crag. Head foremost through the driving rain, the shelter of the crag to gain, and as I am a man, instead of the jutting crag I found, a woman seated on the ground. This neck-breaking double take is more dramatic, perhaps, than anything in Resolution and Independence, but the thematic link seems clear. The narrator's desperate search for shelter parodies in advance the anxious poet's longing for what Coleridge would call a companionable form to assuage his fears of destitution. But the point of both episodes seems to be the almost ludicrous inappropriateness of an image that seems at first, by its very isolation, to offer itself as a response to the subject's wish. In both poems, this pattern of deflected narcissism is associated with spatial anomalies, including a peculiar miniaturization of whatever it is that is supposed to reflect the self. Okay, so now what we're doing is we're cramming too many thoughts into like too little space. So we're again getting this sort of the sublime, ludicrous of the spatial and like the space of a person, whatever, like the personal space you might have. They are playing with the notion of personal space and like what it is to be near other stuff. And like this is sort of going to be our, I guess, the sense of ludicrous that is going to give us a sense of agency. How do we actually fit ourselves into the world when we can't even really find a proper space for our agency? And that's interesting. And I think that's where we're going here. It's dreamlike thinking. Yeah, it's all symbols. But yeah, that's what we were doing here. We're talking poetry. But like this is the thing. It's the spatial thing is just being very manipulated. Yeah. Okay. Corresponding to the slipperiness or inadequacy of the central image in Resolution and Independence is the speaker's well-known but still mysterious inability to concentrate on what he himself wants to interpret as a providential answer to his needs. This is the point, of course, of Lewis Carroll's brilliant parody, The White Knight's Song, in which the speaker keeps asking an old man how he makes his living and then instantly lapses into a reverie about his own self-interested schemes, thinking, for example, of a way to feed oneself on batter, and so go on from day to day, getting a little fatter. Among the felicities of his version, Carroll brings out the social disparity implicit in the encounter. The gentleman poet finally pays attention when the old man obsequiously offers to drink your honor's noble health. I heard him then, for I had just completed my design to keep the Menai bridge from rust by boiling it in wine. I thanked him much for telling me the way he got his wealth, but chiefly for his wish that he might drink my noble health. I don't think we're talking about baby batter at this point, but yes, that'd be creepy as hell. And hey, look at that. We actually have a logician mentioned in this paper. Lewis Carroll, of course, was a logician. That was his day job when he wasn't writing poetry or Alice in Wonderland.
You advise me to give up every hope.
Okay.
In your position, I would
Carroll's point is well taken. The leech gatherer's flash of mild surprise when the protagonist addresses him, like his mysterious smile several stanzas later, is at least partly accountable as a response to the rather forced chumminess of a social superior. But the social awkwardness corresponds, and indeed I think refers to a very different kind of awkwardness that, when examined, will suggest what the leech gatherer really stands for. The speech... you didn't know that's in the semiotics? Well, I don't always mention it, but I have mentioned it before. The speaker's attention actually lapses twice. On the first occasion, the leech gatherer has been recounting, in choice word and measured phrase, above the reach of ordinary men, the simple facts of his life and profession, but but his words now melt into featureless and barely audible continuity. The old man still stood talking by my side, but now his voice to me was like a stream, scarce heard, nor word from word could I divide, and the whole body of the man did seem like one whom I had met with in a dream, or like a man from some far region sent to give me a human strength by apt admonishment. But instead of consolation, the effect of this notion is only to bring back the speaker's former thoughts of ruin, which led him to repeat his original question: how is it that you live, and what is it you do? After a stanza in which the leech gatherer patiently rehearses his early account, the speech.
Size Semietics gifted 100 bits. Size Semietics says, Swiftridge, I find that hard to believe, and yet since it is trusted as true, hence it is credible.
I mean, it's a fact. And thank you for the 100 bits. I appreciate that. Yeah. Henry Dodgson is his name. He still, like, some of his work in philosophical logic is still taken very seriously. There's something called the adoption problem, which Kripke has been writing on off and on since the 70s. That basically references a paper that Dodgson actually wrote as Lewis Carroll, because it was in using characters from his books, the Alice in Wonderland. So it's what the tortoise said to Achilles. And so that still was published in 1894, 1896, and it still getting referenced nowadays. So it's an important work about the failures of showing entailment in the current logic that they had in the 1890s, representing logic and entailment. You used to live in the city where Lewis Carroll lived in England. Ooh, fun. Yeah. So he no, of course, but it's fun. I mean, the funny part about Lewis Carroll was about this whole thing was that he made a lot of money, of course, off Alice in Wonderland, and like it got him more fame than he wanted to. He kind of wanted to be left alone. And he was like, I don't want to have to like deal with people. But then, instead of being a poor academic, he was a rich academic and got to do what he wanted a little bit. And there's a good chance that, I mean, people thought a while back that he might have had like a crush on like his friend's daughter Alice. But now I think they're thinking it's more likely he was having an affair with her mom. And like it was kind of an excuse to go hang out with the family. To say he, had fun with the kids because he didn't have any. But they think he probably was sleeping with his friend, Alice's mom, like his family friend's mom. So yeah, not family friends, like he was friends with the family and the wife. So okay, anywho, while he was talking thus, the lonely place, the old man's shape and speech all troubled me. In my mind's eye I seemed to see him pace about the weary moors continually, wandering about alone and silently, while I these thoughts within myself pursued, he having made a pause, the same discourse renewed. This time the old man's pausing and renewing of the same discourse is spontaneous. No question from the speaker has intervened to break off his account and start it over. The pattern of pausing and renewing has drifted away from its dramatic motivation, in the same way that the haunting image of the wandering leech gatherer has slipped free of the stationary figure by the poet's side. In Wordsworth poetry, Geoffrey Hartman devotes an intriguing paragraph to this production of what he calls an after-image. An after-image of this kind plays an important role in many of Wordsworth's poems. It expresses the possibility of the renewal, or at least recurrence, of a certain experience by including that possibility in the very structure of the experience. As a mental reflex, the after-image elongates the encounter, and as an image of something, it may also suggest an indefinitely extended action. Not any action, of course, it is the image itself repeated of a repeated and persistent action which moves the leech gatherer closer to the figure of the wandering Jew and brings about Wordsworth recognition of his firmness. The image itself repeated of a repeated and persistent action. The splendid formulation has built into it the key to what it is about, the leech gatherer that precisely evades the psychological and, I would add, the Coleridgean appropriation Hartman describes. For what is it in fact that paces continually, laboriously, and opaque across the field of the poet's and the reader's consciousness? What in this poem is marked by choice word and measured phrase, above the reach of ordinary men, a stately speech? What is it that moveth all together, if it move at all, that repeatedly makes a pause and then the same discourse renews? What is it, finally, that in its antiquity, its persistence, and its self-enclosed indifference to any particular thematic content is bound to evade the narcissistic strategies of an anxious Coleridgean poet who so desperately wants it to answer his personal need? Nothing else, it seems to me, but the condensed Spenserian stanza, measured, antique, opaque, elusive, whose persistent and finally pointless repetition constitutes this very poem. In short, I am suggesting the leech gatherer is nothing other than a materialized deposit, a kind of personified sediment or precipitate of the stanzas that serve as the deliberately awkward and alien medium of the speaker's meditation. If the speaker's encounter with the leech gatherer triggers a version of the self-referential turn that the Sublime seems to depend on, the agency referred to is not a faculty in the speaker's own mind, but whatever forces it, Wordsworth would say imagination, that keeps the stanzas pacing in their halting but inexorable way. The speaker himself, after all, is only another effect of the same procedure of temporary condensation. He only enters the poem, as numerous readers have noticed, with the shift from description to narration, and from present to past tense, at the beginning of the third stanza. Both figures are introduced to allegorize the disparity between the poetic medium and the strategy of self-reflection that motivates the sublime experience proper. Okay, so what the hell just happened here? It seems like this was the whole thing. This is the whole thing. Where is the sublime here? Well, the sublime here is in the kind of ludicrous constancy of the forms of poetry. It's that this is like they have to use the same sort of structure that is constantly being used over and over and over since, time immemorial, but they have to kind of overcome that in order to actually say anything new. Now, how do you actually do that? Well, you've got this sort of thing that never ends. It just kind of repeats itself over and over, the stanzas, but in some sense you have to always be fighting the stanzas that you like. How do you get outside your stanzas? That's the hard question. So how do you overcome something that cannot be overcome? Because that is the definition of how you do your work, is through the stanza. So how do you make it how do you make the stanza ludicrous? And I mean, that's a hard question. Like anyone who writes, like I write, we've got writers, and you don't even have to write like narrative or whatever. You can write your chemistry reports, whatever, but you're always going to be inheriting this sort of historical structure that you find yourself at some point within that sort of written conventions. And so you're going to be stuck within these conventions, and it doesn't really matter what they are, but they're going to be the sort of outside of anyone's control, the way it progresses. And so these conventions are moving, and this is the thing. How do you actually deal with this? And if you're trying to get yourself out of it, you're not getting yourself out of it. You can't do that in some sense. You're just part of this sort of ever forward motion of the written conventions. And so what do you do? And so this is what the author is contending, is that this is what it is. It's the poetry itself that is the limit case for in some sense the sublime. How do you overcome the impossibility of overcoming your own medium? Okay. Recognizing that the poem is an allegory of the slippage between experience and medium, so this is the thing, the experience and the medium. suggests, I think, an answer to the intriguing question raised about resolution and independence by Thomas Weiskel in a crucial transition passage of the Romantic Sublime. Weiskel's own approach to the Romantic poetry, as he recognizes, depends on the suspension of all skepticism regarding the irreducibility of the speaker's psychology, no matter how theatrically presented. Hence, he will consider only the various careers of egos within poems and not the relation between those careers and media in which they are represented. Discussing what he calls the protagonist's sublime aphasia in stanza 16, Weiskel notes that this moment of psychological blockage occurs within Spenserian cadences that roll onward as by an unrelenting agency or a saving chain of form, the province of poet and reader, not of the eye. And he asks, does the form represent in some sense a recovery of the power of speech and of listening? The question seems to me too difficult for a clear answer. Lumpy says, the American Chemical Society has a small handbook of how usual words gain this or that precise meaning in scientific article, yet I found that there is still wiggle room in this stifling writing style. Yeah. This is one of those things that when you write enough, you're going to realize that as clear as you think you can make something, there is no perfectly clear. Like, there just isn't. This is one of my problems with how people tell you to write philosophy, you should make it clear. That doesn't mean anything. You've got standards of the day that people call clear, but these things slide. And so, I guess in your area, Lumpy, you've got, something given down by the American Chemical Society. But again, these things are at best, guidelines, but they're not going to, rigidly work 100%. They just can't. That's not how rules are. Rules do not last forever. They all break down. So, all right. Yeah, so again, and this is what they're saying here. Does the form represent in some sense a recovery of the power of speech and of listening? How does the form actually do this? That's really hard. How does a poetry form actually work? What is the form really doing, recovering something of the speech and of listening to the speech? I don't know, but nor does anyone else know. Okay, the question is indeed unanswerable in these terms, since it already assumes that the formal succession of stanzas must be in some way assimilated to the same psychological structure of crisis and recovery that the career of the protagonist already enacts. But this power of the stanzas does not, I think, lie in their capacity to resolve the protagonist's psychological crisis by going over his head to the poet and reader. The figure of the leech gatherer functions, in my view, as an allegorical sign of the stanza's detachment from whatever empirical strategy they might seem to embody, and thus as an indirect or negative demonstration of the imagination's transcendence of whatever agents or objects might seem temporarily to constrain it. At this point I am struck, as you may also be struck, by the proximity of my account to conclusions reached by Michael Fried in his fascinating investigation of French painting during roughly the same period. My discussion of the way Wordsworth seems both to invoke and resist the narcissistic strategies of sublime aesthetics seem analogous to Fried's account of the way certain French paintings seem to reject overt theatricality by feigning, as it were, a sheer indifference to their spectators. A poem like Resolution and Independence might be said to conjoin the opposing tendencies described by Fried of absorption and theatricality. The stand-in for Fried's theatrical spectator would be the poem's anxious speaker. The leech gatherer, bent double and fixedly gazing into the pond, would replace the various self-absorbed figures whose function, according to Fried, is to suggest that a painting exists without regard to the audience for which it was produced. Given the numerous crucial differences in medium and theme, such analogies are difficult to assess. For now, I will only indicate very briefly two major ways in which the analogy can be said to break down. First, it is not primarily his self-absorption that makes the leech gatherer a personification of the poetry's indifference to its speaker's concerns. What gives the figure his power is his assimilation to the recurrent ebb and flow of Wordsworth's distorted Spenserians, an effect that belies his static placement at the edge of the bare pool. second, it is not self-absorption, but a double failure of self-presence on the part of the speaker who is unable to focus, and on the part of the old man who cannot, for all his debilitated innocence, hold still. It is this double failure of stability that seems to count for Wordsworth as a formal token of what he calls imagination. In this sense, Wordsworth remains wholly committed to the aesthetics of the sublime, that is, to the allegorizing of failure as a revelation of a higher power. Wordsworth's version of the sublime is no more or less thematic than the versions it resists, but the power indicated by Wordsworth's failure is not exactly God, nor the self, nor even the poem. It is the power itself of poetic representation, conceived by Wordsworth as the repeated dislocation of attention from particular images of the self. Okay, interesting. So basically what it is that you've got these like lines on your page. You've got all these lines on the page, all these lines here, line here, line here, line here, and it's just line after line after line. But somehow you get away from that in moving through it. But the lines keep coming. They don't stop. And then you keep moving through it and it doesn't stop. And somehow you transcend this thing. And that is the notion of sublime here. It's just you've got this sort of constant movement of like words in space and people trying to analyze words in space. And somehow you're supposed to get an idea of it. Some sort of poetic representation that comes out from all these lines and words in space. Really? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know enough critical... I can't even think. I don't know enough about the language theory about this stuff that maybe this is a good idea or not. But this is the question. We are stuck with this sort of just line after line. And you can think of this nowadays in like this was 1984. We said we get the swipe after swipe after swipe after swipe and after swipe. You could remake this in the nowadays. What is the constant repetition of a, you know, next post, next video. Thank you, algorithm of TikTok or whatever it is. Everyone praise be to the algorithm. And then this is the sort of thing. How do you actually transcend any of this stuff? Well, I don't know, but this is what they're saying. The power indicated by Wordsworth's failure is not exactly God or the self. Like your failure to like be a person when you're just like, you know, uncomfortably swiping through your social media posts. What is that? Well, is the power itself. It is the power itself of poetic representation, and this is the power of social media at the moment, not a poetic representation, conceived by Wordsworth as a repeated dislocation of attention from particular image of the self. This is exactly where we're stuck. The repeated dislocation of attention from particular images of the self. And I mean, what is so like, I mean, this is exactly what it is. In social media, everyone's like, you know, got videos of themselves. There's a video of me going out to you. So you've got all these egos and everyone's flipping through this like on Twitch, on, you know, Reddit, on Facebook, whatever it is. And you're dislocating your attention. You're jumping from spot to spot. So this is interesting. It still seems like there's something to be said here. Because we're talking about attention and dislocation of attention. So, nowadays. And where is the power? Hey Chad guy, yep, I do have a Discord. I post extremely rarely. It's basically good for, I mean, if you want to contact me, that's cool. But, what's it called? Yeah, like, you can get notifications. And welcome in, Chad guy. I forget where I saw you, but you've been in, some nearby chats, you know, either it's Aristotle's or Evolve Yourself or maybe Ann's, I forget who. But welcome in, I hope you're doing well. Yeah. Some things are more exciting than others. This was interesting, you know, it's a literary theory. Yeah, it's comparative literature. So, what exactly is the sublime in poetry according to Wordsworth? It's like, yeah, Agnes, that's right. So it's interesting though. Where exactly can we get sublime out of poetry? And in this case, they're saying you're trying to transcend the structure of the poetry itself. and how there's a constant march of words. Like, you know, like I'm scrolling through the page. There's a constant march of words, line after line, stanza after stanza, paragraph after paragraph. And but it's like it belies it, like it, you know, you have to get more out of it than just the structure. So Alice lived in Wonderland, not Lewis Carroll. At least I don't think he did. Dodgson, we got Dodgson here. Okay. Do we have anything else to say about this? Oh, Guilford. Yeah, Lewis Carroll. So. Yeah. Okay, I don't know if I have a whole lot more to say about this. It's a fun paper, though. So, if you have any questions, let me know, but we can move on to something